r/ask Reddit. What happens regularly that would horrify a person from 100 years ago? Why aren't you going to church? Why are you dressed like that? Why are you drinking from the same water fountain as that guy? The amount of atheists would give a person from 100 years ago a heart attack. The amount of open Satanists. Women's fashion. Knees were considered scandalous. Knees? I shit you not. Tablecloths were invented to cover the table's legs. The fact people will eat ass but not the first piece of bread in the loaf. I eat that slice of bread. Amma. You are what you eat, my friend. Touched by everyone but chosen by none. Really weird, but in my culture girls weren't allowed to eat a specific type of food because it was reserved for males. So just the sight idea of women enjoying the food 100 years later would really duck them up. Can you explain it in more detail? Women mostly weren't allowed to eat food rich in protein. The references I'll be using aren't from personal experience because that wasn't something that was practiced in my household. But eggs, for example. It was believed that if you ate eggs you would become sterile, among other things. There's also this specific type of meat. I tried asking my sister but she too forgot the name, but women weren't allowed to eat it and I don't know the reason. But it tastes great, so maybe that's the reason. Apparently you also were told not to eat meat from a cow because your child would be born fat. It's weird, man. But it all revolves around food that are often associated with luxury. Luxury meaning food that are just known for being delicious and are usually cooked on special occasions and shit. I don't know. I'm really horrible at explaining things. And I don't know this in full detail. So that's all I can offer. Interracial marriage. Also same-sex marriage. The amount of single people in their 20s and 30s. No joke. My great-grandpa took the horse and buggy to the church across the river and asked for a wife. He returned a week later and they gave him a woman who was 21. She was considered nearly unmarriable due to her advanced age. They of course then went back to the farm and had 12 children that survived to adulthood, as you did back then. People taking fat from their butts and putting it in their cheeks. Or worse, lips. The way people are dressed. Men not in suits would be seen as uneducated production workers, and women wearing shorts and close-fitting clothes would be seen as promiscuous. For what it's worth, grainy black and white photographs are hiding lots of stained and frayed fabric. Sure, suits and ties were a lot more common, but for a lot of guys, it was their only suit, and they had been wearing it for years and years, and the fabric was dotted with patched over rips. I think your average 1920er would be super impressed by how bright and clean everybody's clothes are these days. Oh, I got a good one. Birth control. Amen. Diaphragms and condoms were a thing in 1920, but their availability was pretty limited in most countries, to the point that many couples had no idea they were an option. You had to get a hold of literature that described contraception, which was illegal for organizations to send through the mail, at least in the US. So you basically had to wait for an activist to come around door to door. Then, once you decided you wanted some of those, you had to find a sympathetic pharmacist and discreetly inquire. If you were an unmarried woman, they'd probably refuse to sell to you. As an illustrative example, take my ancestors. My great-grandma, Mary, had 10 kids, and the youngest, Rita, was born in 1922. 20 years went by and Rita was in college. Mary, a high school dropout, was reading the paper and it mentioned that a certain state was considering a bill to legalize contraceptive use within marriage. Mary turned to her more educated daughter and said, "Rita, I don't recognize this word in the paper. What's a contraceptive?" Rita always swore, later, that she didn't blush while discreetly explaining. But she fully admitted that she did laugh when her mother's response was, "Wait, to stop you from getting pregnant? Why would anyone want to do that?" I sometimes wonder what Mary would say if she could see her 5 dozen great-grandkids, each of them with only 4 children apiece. I guess she was happy with 10, but I don't think any of us would sign on for it. The plethora of graphic porn available. I think you underestimate the horniness of people in the 1920s. Most music probably. Imagine people from 100 years ago listening to WAP, figuring they understand what the slang words mean. Death metal would be a bit of a surprise to them. There are numerous devices in my house that look like weird windows that sometimes make a sound. Then I touch the screen, and then another person is just there, talking to me. It's clearly magic or a portal to another realm. Also imagine a laptop. What does that weird looking plastic book do? Let's see. 1920 aka Roaring 20s. They had just come out of a world war and a pandemic. The stock markets were booming. They had cars and planes and phones and radio and transatlantic cables. Private and public debauch were at an all-time high. Don't think much of what we get up to would surprise, let alone horrify, these peeps. 4 people are saying stuff like planes, cars, guns. Semi-auto guns existed in 1920, rare. Planes existed, rare. And cars existed, common. It is basically expected that existing technologies will improve. If a person from 2070 comes to us and says in the future, phones and computers are faster, I don't think any jaws will drop. Pretty sure the pace at which the world is improving and evolving. Look at the technology nowadays. Pretty sure each day they bring out a new and improved chip or whatnot. It's insane to think about. People in 1920 thought the world was changing pretty fast, and one could make a case that they would have seen more change in their lifetime than we have. An adult in 1920, born 1900 or earlier, would have been born before airplanes existed, when cars and radio were still a novelty, and there was no such thing as a feature film. If you wanted to hear music, you played it yourself, sang, or went to a concert. Unless you were one of the few people rich enough to buy one of the first wax cylinder phonographs. All that had changed by 1920. In the US, women had the vote by 1920 and were starting to cut their hair and wear skirts that didn't sweep the floor. Prohibition had gone into effect. The Great War had devastated a generation of young men in Western Europe and changed social mores throughout the West. The Bolsheviks had killed the Tsar and taken over the former Russian Empire. The Panama Canal had been completed, saving 3,500 nautical miles and revolutionizing world trade. Between 1900 and 1920 we figured out how to do safe blood transfusions, and X-rays became a hospital staple. We were on the brink of discovering insulin, so that diabetes would no longer be a death sentence. From 2000 to today, most change is about making existing technology faster, more efficient, and in the case of phones and computers, smaller. Graphics have become better. Instead of Ethernet cables, we're wireless. There have been few, if any, changes to our daily lives as radical as seeing streets full of horses become streets full of cars, or seeing airplanes go from a couple of hobbyists' clever toy to seeing them used in combat. When my great-grandma had a baby at a hospital, her bill was $80. She stayed in the hospital for about a week, which I think was normal back then. When my sister had her baby, it was $35,000. Neither of them had any complications. Is that normal for the US now? That's crazy. In the UK it costs a person nothing at all, apart from a small deduction from taxes every year, but there is no upfront cost at all. Yep, Americans always say oh, but you have to pay taxes, so it's not actually free. Well, Karen, we pay more or less in taxes as you pay for health insurance. Only our taxes fully cover all necessary treatments, while your insurance covers only some treatments, and even then you have to pay thousands out of pocket. The amount of stuff we waste and let go to waste. One thing my grandma told me is, if you're full and you eat so you don't waste it, you're still wasting it. But now you also get all the extra calories. Yep, this is why I don't tell my kids to clean their plates. If they tell me they are full, I simply remind them that there's no snacks for a few hours. If they are on the edge of being full but could still eat a little, they will. Most of the time they do not. I think self-regulation with eating is a very crucial thing for kids to learn. People have noises coming out of their asses. Then they pull a little box out of their back pocket, look at it, and start chattering like there was someone there to talk to, and people are always sitting around looking at pictures in these little boxes. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.